Hello and welcome to episode 77 of The Garden Log with me, Ben Darg. I am a gardener and I am recording this episode in early April 2020. I'm recording in a room in which I have recorded at least 50 episodes of this podcast, and in which everything is similar and yet somehow everything has changed. I am of course referring to the loss of my desk and its replacement by this cot at which I am looking now. For this is no longer a gentleman's study, it is a child's nursery, albeit a child's nursery very cunningly themed around a gentleman's study. It is the bedroom of a child who wishes to see dark green walls hung with a variety of exciting botanical prints, mostly themed around the epidendrum orchids of South America. There are some childish touches. There is a large wooden seagull that hangs from the ceiling, and a set of shelves containing brightly coloured children's books and stuffed objects. I would say stuffed toys, but I'm not sure. One of them is a stuffed leek, which is, I suppose, quite a simple shape to manufacture on a sewing machine. The most profound change, though, in this room is that the doors are open. For the very first time in all of the sessions I have spent here talking into this microphone, I have the doors to the garden open. It is not because I have located some previously missing key. It is because there are no aeroplanes in the sky. And why are there no aeroplanes in the sky, you might ask? Were you listening in the distant future? Well, because we are in the middle of the great coronavirus 2020 lockdown. Well, that's all very well and good, you might say, but what's an aeroplane? Gosh, we did lose a lot. I haven't lost much. I have been very lucky, and I have kept my excitement about plants despite not actually having much interaction with them. I haven't been going to work. My work is essentially inessential. It is decorative. I make things prettier and pleasanter, but I am not needed on the roads getting septic fingers from rose thorns or ending up in A&E after dicing myself to pieces with a hedge trimmer. I'm doing my bit by staying in the barracks and letting the world turn on without me, which actually suits me quite well. But that's not to say that gardens and gardening have been absent from my life. As well as doing my own garden, I have taken great joy in wandering the streets, in going for my one government-mandated walk and observing the gardens around me. I live down in South London, in Zone 2, in a fairly built-up area. There are parks and streets and trees and houses all about the place. You probably know the kind of place I live. And there are just so many things to see and look at. I know that a lot of people are creating wonderful journeys, nature diaries, the solace they are taking in the fells and the peaks, the empty moors. I do not have that luxury, but I think that here we have a greater wealth of stories to tell from our interaction with plants. I think that nature is very beautiful, not a very controversial point, and I think that the people who live in the most fantastic nature are very lucky. They get to swoop through the vales and they stumble upon glorious misty sunrises over deserted ponds. But we need to remember that that pond is nothing but the consequence of a series of geological accidents. It is a chance depression, and the mist above it is an atmospheric temperature differential. It's a pretty accident, and I don't think that's art. I think that art requires humans. I think it requires intention. It requires an aim, no matter how far from that aim the eventual outcome is. And unless we start talking about belief structures and things well beyond gardening podcasts, I don't think we can say that there is an intention in nature and in that mixing of warm and cold air over the lake that made that beautiful picture that made us all jealous when we saw it on Instagram. There is intention in that bit of arboricia you stuffed into the crack in your wall. So, I'm here to talk about intentionality in the suburbs. I'm here to reclaim the stroll for the suburbanite. So yes, there will be an episode of The Garden Log this week, and it won't necessarily be about the things that I've been doing, but it will be about things that other people are doing, about human ambition, about success and heroic horticultural failure. It will be the things that I have seen and the things I have thought in the week in wandering. On Monday, I spent my 1 hour outside the house ration on a walk up around the large villas that surround Dulwich Park. It's quite an interesting area in terms of front gardens because a lot of people have money and evidently a lack of time, and they employ garden designers / local landscapers, and sometimes you get little outbreaks of similar gardens as there's a little bit of keeping up with the jonesing going on and a bit of, well, I use this bloke, why don't you use him as well? My brother works quite a bit as a landscaper and has said that sometimes you can settle into a street, a well-to-do up-and-coming street, and spend 3 or 4 years quite happily building the exact same garden in various neighbours' houses, and as people have barbecues and unveil their latest creation over a glass of white wine, then the questions turn to landscapers and you get booked in to do the same white render Mediterranean-style job in someone else's garden. The front gardens obviously are all I can see from the road, and I noticed a lot of amelanchier lamarckii up on that street. And amelanchier lamarckii is a tree that I have a funny relationship with. As a young horticultural person who has come into gardening senescence in the last 2 decades, I have obviously planted it. I've planted it many times, particularly the multi-stem form, of course, the sort that you'd see in the glossy Society of Garden Designers magazine, where that hip young designer in their round glasses and their wide-legged trousers has designed a beautiful outdoor space where they have cedar wood everywhere, cedar wood decking that matches the cedar wood bench tops and the cedar wood horizontal fence panelling. Gosh, it's cedary. And there you see the amelanchier. It sits within a little square cut from the limestone paving, and it is lit up with bright halogen lights. It's like a prisoner on the run, a prisoner illuminated by the spotlight from the guard tower. Stark and bare there in the garden, and it works. It works there because there it is isolated and its structure does the talking. It is walled off from nature's strange and fluffy exuberances. It is its own creature. It is an artwork in a gallery. But it doesn't work in a front garden, I thought to myself as I wandered this street. I don't think it works because there it can't be alone. Its structure doesn't make an impact. It doesn't have the brilliance of the limestone paving and the stark lines of the cedar wood. It has a path for the postman to wander up. It has a square of A3 paper in the window where the children of the house have painted a rainbow for the NHS workers, and next door's forsythia is spilling over into the space. And if it's not spilling over, if it's been hacked back, then it's there. And it's yellow. Gosh, it is so yellow. And the amelanchier can't compete with that. I've also decided, after using it a lot myself and having gifted it to my father-in-law as a birthday present, done various things with it, that I don't think it is a good spring blossom tree. I don't think it has the purity that the prunus has. I know it's impossible to compare spring blossom to the prunus. It's really not fair to use the superlative as a comparison for all, but still, when the prunus has so recently been in such spectacular form, the amelanchier blossom looks polluted somehow. It's because the little red leaves are coming out at the same time, and they somehow take something of the brilliance, purity and freshness away from the tree, or at least I feel that way. The best amelanchier in London, by the way, by which I mean the worst, are the amelanchier by Oval Station on a little triangle of land with about 14 lanes of traffic going past it. I used to cycle past it every day when I was allowed onto public transport. And these poor things have been planted in multi-stemmed glory with an underplanting of Lyria muscari and then left without watering, without care, without attention to fight for life for the last 3 years, and fighting they are. They now have about 3 or 4 leaves on top of each one, and are just clinging to existence. But it shows that for all of its trendiness, it is a very useful, tough and hardy tree still. Seeing all the amelanchier out was slightly poignant because I left work for the last time with the amelanchier that I'd planted, a whole hedging row of them at the back of a very big border, in full fat bud. The buds look like little bramble flowers, all bunched up in clusters and ready to open. And no doubt they are open now, but I am not seeing them. I am seeing other things in other gardens. On Tuesday, I took a wander in the other direction. I went down towards Camberwell, and it was quite exciting to see all of the garden going on in the big mansion blocks and the shared houses. People were out in small groups tackling gardens that hadn't really been gone over in a very long time. And there were gardening implements in bins at the end of roads and left out. Quite a few wheelie bins had those blue plastic fork handles sticking out of them. That kind of plastic that shows it has spent years aging in the sun. The kind of plastic you used to find on children's play equipment in the gardens of not very nice roadside family pubs. And these forks had obviously been slowly decaying in the borders, gently rotting where they'd hoped to remain until quarantine forced owners to go out there and pick them up and heave them into the ground once more, only to find them splintering in their hands. I wonder if we should come out of this crisis with our gardens in a better or worse state. Is all fussing with gardens necessary? I think sometimes there is an impulse to garden that comes from a desire to do, a very reasonable desire, but that can lead to everything getting chopped off at torso height and everything emergent dug out of the border and piled somewhere. And sometimes it's better to let things grow vast and wild and let the things in the border fight out with themselves and with the grass. I'd hate to see this crisis lead to 1 million new flower beds, each of them 1.5 feet wide and 20 foot long. On Wednesday, I was out in my garden. My garden's very small. It is probably about the size of a room in an average house. It has, as a dominant feature, a dead apple tree. It's a very tragic tale, and one that I have told before in this podcast. But when we were buying this garden flat, the viewing was in October, and the apple was fruiting. And I jumped up and plucked one of the fruit and ate it as we were being shown round, and it tasted delicious. And it wasn't particularly one of the reasons we offered on the place, but I like to tell people it was. And unfortunately, by the time we'd moved in, the tree was dead. I think in that hasty bit of re-landscaping, let's try and get another 12 grand on the asking price, the previous owners had put in some heavy-duty flower bed composting, turn over the soil type job, and had chopped through all the roots. And so it stands as a dead sentinel. And I have fought various battles with everyone who comes to visit the house who says, why don't you chop down that tree? And I fight for it because I'm using it, firstly, to hold up the washing line, and secondly, to grow things up, to grow up. At the moment, I've got a Banksia rose, one of the yellow Banksia luteas. I've got a red clematis Rebecca. I've got a Pileostygia vibanoides, which is a self-clinging evergreen climber of the climbing hydrangea ilk, those same long-lived white flowers. Not that it has flowered yet in our garden. I think it's going to take a time to get going. But there is a big collection of things now scrambling up there. And the third reason that I'm keeping it there is for the wildlife gains. I'm certain the thing is jammed full of beneficial beetles because I see all sorts of birds up there, mainly tits of various descriptions, and there's a feeder hanging below them full of sunflower seeds and good peanuts, but they peck at the bark of the tree, lifting out little proteiny grubs from beneath. And this year, as the thing is even more decayed, various birds are visiting, mainly pigeons I have to say, and pulling great twigs out and flying off to neighbouring gardens where they're making their home. Thank goodness not in our garden, because they make such a racket nesting pigeons. I lived in a flat in Hackney with a pigeon just outside the bedroom window on a ledge, and it was a horrendous racket. But anyway, this tree is such a joy to watch in the mornings, to see the blackbirds courting in it, to see the robins there using it as a staging post before they fly down into their nest. So that is the dominant feature in the garden. And on Wednesday morning I faced it as we did our morning workouts. I was lifting a sack of compost, 50 litres of compost, above my head in a sort of shoulder press action. It is as if I were mulching a flower bed that was situated at 7.5 foot off the ground. That kind of functional fitness that we all need. And I thought to myself how magnificent the garden is looking this year. This is now going to be into our third year in the garden, and it's coming into its own. I've always said that you shouldn't wait a year in gardens. The advice is that you wait a year, you see what's there, you see what you want to plant, and then you get going in the second year in a house. And I say no, plants take a while to take off. They need that first year in the ground as soon as possible, because otherwise you're going to be looking at something incredibly weedy and wishing you'd got going earlier. Who cares if you make a mistake? Dig it up. That's why you've got a garden, for digging and moving things about in. Get things in the ground early, which is what we did, and now they're starting to look wonderful. Particularly the Euphorbia. This is the Euphorbia Caracas subspecies wolfenii, which for my money is the best Euphorbia. I know it's one of the most commonly seen ones, but it's seen for a reason. The green is just magnificent. It's a glowing special effects green. It's a 3 Mile Island kind of green. It's funny that it's so yellowy and so very fresh. And it's also the right height for a plant in the garden. I think that, particularly in London gardens, you often see lots of little plants. You see lots of ankle height plants and flowers, and you see lots of vast overgrown shrubs that have become top heavy and grown out so that as they get higher they lean over and over the lawn. But you don't see good, powerful, punchy plants that do their thing and end at around nipple height, around the height of a good clump of dahlias, and particularly not at this time of year. And I don't think that I could ever live in a garden without Euphorbia Caracas subspecies wolfenii at this time of year. It looks particularly good because we've used that hackneyed old trick of planting it alongside Erismum, the purple perennial wallflower, Bowles mauve variety, which is a near indestructible plant with lovely bright purple flowers that just goes on, and it's rather derided because it's so reliable. It suffers a little bit from being the only thing in flower outside the church hall. in one of those little planting boxes that's only half filled with compost, half-eaten marigolds hanging around the bottom, and a bit of what might have been lobelia before it all dried out. But the erysimum is still going. That Pole's mauve is still flowering there, and so I think its reputation suffers a little bit for that. It's no amelanchier lamarckii, but it is such a brilliant plant, and it's so easy to propagate. Just take some cuttings from it and you've got it forever. So those two plants, if you're looking for a horticultural tip, are my tip for this time of year. Behind those in that bed, I'm very pleased with the rose that I put in from a cutting. There's a cutting of a rose that was in flower on our wedding day. Bright pink flower. It only flowers once a year. It's a true rambler. And for that reason, I was wary about putting it in, because although it has the most brilliant, bright pink clusters of small little flowers, it only has them for a few weeks and then they are gone. But I'm so glad that I did put it in, because its leaves are so fresh. They're almost Euphorbia green in their yellowish, bright iceberg lettuce intensity. They don't have what a lot of roses unfortunately do have, which is a muddy aspect to the new growth. They have a tendency to put on red stems and green leaves all mixed together. And I think that if you have been painting rainbows for the NHS this week, you will know what happens when you mix your red and your green. And that's unfortunately what a lot of new growth on roses look like to me. This one doesn't have that. It has pure green, and for that I'm very, very grateful. However, not all is well in my garden. On Thursday, my wife and I had a disagreement about the tulips. And as with all disagreements in good, finely matched couples, we are both right and certainly both wrong. I have the microphone, so I might come across as slightly less wrong, but if she would like the right to reply, she can email me on thegardenlogpodcast at gmail.com, as can anyone else who might have something to say about the matter. The tulip in question is Uncle Tom, and Uncle Tom is something of an acquired taste. It is not an elegant tulip. It is a vast, peony-flowered thing. And by peony-flowered, it really is a peony-flowered tulip. It is the size of a peony. It is the ruffled, flumpy, floofy bath scrubber flowering shape of a peony. This particular specimen has been in cultivation since the late 1930s. So it definitely has something about it. The amount of tulips that are bred each year and then fade from the catalogues and never to be seen again, this one clings on. But I suspect it clings on just because it is about as much tulip petal as you can get for your bulb price, and the public love petals. I am in the corner of the Uncle Tom tulip. I am fighting for it, mainly because I chose it and I planted it. Kat, on the other hand, wants something more of a lily-flowered, one of those elegant tulips that swell at the base, pinch into a waist, and then flick out like the end of an expensive hairdo. She'd like something like that, in a very fresh, zingy, thirst-quenching orange. A tulip that looks like a glass of mandarin juice, might taste lovely. And she's probably right. They are beautiful, beautiful things. But I am putting the case for my Uncle Tom. Kat's argument is that they are over-petaled and the petals are dull and stuffy and fruitcake-like. They are the anti-citrus zest. But I don't think this is right. I think that the fault lies in the surrounding planting, which is also my fault, by the way. But it's the fact that the surrounding planting hasn't gone up fast enough. It isn't green enough. I think that tulips look awful when you can see the soil, and I think that goes for all tulips. I think the single stem with two leaves off it and a tulip bulb on top with bare soil all around it is a disastrous look. That's why we cover the ground around them with forget-me-nots, so often. What I'd want of these tulips was them to be surrounded by green. I want strappy green leaves around them. I want strappy snowdrop leaves, strappy old miniature daffodil leaves. I want hummocks of bulging paddocky grass. And that's where I want these tulips to be seen, because there, amongst that emergent foliage, they would look completely different. The red would be perfect beads of blood. There'd be little woodland jewels dropped by a passing knight. And that doesn't work when the soil can be seen. They become faded and old and tired. I think with these plants, context is everything. There is no value in a plant alone. Context is all that matters. It's like a text message. Everyone who's been to an employment tribunal will know that. It's not just about what the message said, it's about what surrounded that message. This is borne out in the bits of the garden where the Uncle Tom worked. There are patches where we have a forest of emerging crocosmia leaves, and there the Uncle Tom does shine out. It does appear as a globe of red, and that red is fresher. It doesn't look like a wind-blown scrap of faded velvet like it does in the other bits of the garden where it's planted next to dry-looking lavender which hasn't quite leafed out. I think it just goes to show that there is no perfect plant, only perfect planting combinations. So I'm going to stubbornly fight for the Uncle Tom tulip. I suppose that it's got a crucial fault in that it clashes somewhat, or does not really clash, but it doesn't go with its own foliage, which is something of a downside. It's like when a person's personality doesn't match their dress sense. There's something jarring about it. That red doesn't go with the glaucous green of the leaves in the way that pink tulips do. Pink tulips work with tulip-coloured leaves, and orange tulips to a certain extent do as well. This red certainly doesn't, so I concede that point, but the war is not yet lost. Have a look it up for yourself. You'll see what I mean by blowsy. I really am enjoying spending more time in my own garden, no matter how tiny it might be, and I'm sort of hoping that it continues for a little bit longer, because there are some events that I'm very excited about coming up this spring. Events that wouldn't be happening had I waited before putting things in. Flowerings that didn't happen in preceding years, but I think now are ready to come. I'm particularly excited about my Rubus spectabilis, my ornamental bramble. I've put in a couple of years ago an Olympic double, one of the big pom-pom flowered pink ornamental brambles, and looking at the stems, I think that's going to do something this year. Interestingly, it kept 2 leaves all the way through the winter. I went out and checked on them each weekend, and they were still there, bravely shining away. There's agapanthus starting to establish themselves. There are cannas that overwintered underneath the pear tree without being blackened at all by the frost. That ornamental bramble is another one of these very, very pure green of leaf plants, but I'm hoping it has quite a nice stem structure in winter as well. In a garden this small, it probably won't. It'll probably just look confused and semi-derelict, and I'll end up pruning it back heavily each year. But it's very exciting to see these things coming up. I will try to keep you updated in future editions of The Week in Wandering. And that was that. In quarantine, the week ends on Thursday, which is today. I don't have any recommendations for you this week, though I have seen that lots of the big gardens have taken it upon themselves to give virtual tours of their gardens. I haven't watched any yet, as I fear it would puncture my bubble of self-deceiving, I'm okay with not being in my garden that I have carefully created around me at the moment. But I'm sure I will in coming weeks. If you want to find them, then just search for Lockdown Garden Tour on YouTube, and I think you will find quite a few of them. If you find any particularly good ones, then do let me know on thegardenlogpodcast at gmail.com. Likewise, if you have any questions, horticultural dilemmas you would like solved, or questions for me about horticulture more generally, then do send them in. While normal service is interrupted, I think I would go back to the horticultural conundrums days that I did in the early days of this podcast and answer some questions from the listeners. So look forward to that in the coming weeks. I hope that you have a wonderful time over the next few days and weeks. If you are able to get outside, then do so. Go and look at the gardens emerging. Go and look at what your neighbours are doing. Go and look at the ingrained, amazing will to garden that there is within the human race. If you have your own garden, all the better. Try and get out there. If you don't have your own garden, then at least for now, the parks in the UK are still open. Go out and see some of the UK park horticulture. I know that we are constantly hearing about how parks have been undercut and underfunded, and it is true and it is scandalous, but there is still some very good horticulture going on in our public parks. Either legacy horticulture, the remnants of the Victorian plantings, which are fantastic to explore, and current horticulture, even if it's just maintenance contractors doing it. There are people who care. It's now time for me to go on my hour of allowed and allocated exercise time. I'm going to take the baby out in the stroller. I think we'll walk to Peckham Rye. I think we'll go and have a wander around the J.J. Sexby garden. I can't get into the archives at the moment to research the man, but there is a little garden named after him there in the park where the imperial fritillaries are just coming out and the last of the pale daffodils are still in magnificent bloom. If you need me over the next couple of weeks, then there would probably be a very good place to hang around. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.